The battlefield smelled of smoke and iron. The sky above the alien world was a strange shade of violet, painted by two moons that hung like watchful eyes. Broken machines lay scattered across the ground, their frames glowing faintly from the heat of combat. Soldiers of Liara's army moved slowly through the ruins, gathering the wounded, whispering prayers to their ancestors. And there, standing with his dented armor and a sword streaked with ash, was Daniel, the only human among them. He had fought from dawn until dusk. His breath came heavy and his arms ached, but his eyes still searched the field for danger. Every step he took left a mark in the dust. His armor, old and battered, bore cracks that looked like scars, each one telling the story of a battle survived. Yet Daniel himself stood tall, his spirit unbroken. For months he had marched beside Liara, the alien princess general who commanded this army. She was tall, with sharp, noble features and eyes like molten gold. Her armor shone brighter than the rest, marked with the symbols of her royal house. To her people she was not only a leader, but the last hope of survival in this endless war. Liara respected Daniel's skill. She could not deny his courage. He had saved many lives even when others doubted him, but she kept her distance. He was human, an outsider. No matter how many victories he helped them earn, a voice inside her reminded her not to trust too easily. That evening, as the campfires flickered and the soldiers gathered around their meals, Daniel sat alone, cleaning his sword with slow, careful motions. His hands were steady, though his face showed weariness. He was used to being alone. Back home before the war, he had been a soldier too, fighting battles for people who did not always thank him. This world felt the same, though the stars above were different. Liara approached, her golden cape brushing the ground behind her. The soldiers straightened when they saw her, bowing their heads in respect. She stopped near Daniel, her eyes narrowing slightly. "You fought well today," she said, her voice calm but sharp. Daniel looked up at her. "So did your soldiers." There was a pause between them. The crackle of the fire filled the silence. Around them the army's chatter softened, as if they too waited for what would be said. "You always throw yourself into danger," Liara continued, folding her arms. "You saved me again, Daniel. But I wonder why. Do you think a human can win honor among my people by risking his life like a fool?" Her words struck him harder than a blade. Daniel lowered his eyes, silent. He remembered the moment she spoke of. In the chaos of battle, the enemy's blade had nearly struck her down. He had leapt in front, his armor taking the blow meant for her. Pain had seared through his body, but he held the line until her soldiers closed in. He had not done it for glory. He had not done it for her praise. He had done it because that was who he was, someone who could not stand aside while others fell. Now, hearing her dismiss his sacrifice as foolishness, something inside him grew heavy. "I don't fight for honor," he said finally, his voice quiet. "I fight because it's the right thing to do." Liara's eyes flickered, but her pride would not let her soften. "Then perhaps you should learn when to stop. A soldier who throws away his life is no use to anyone." Around them, soldiers exchanged uneasy glances. None dared to speak. Daniel slowly stood. He looked at her, really looked, and saw not only the warrior but also the wall she had built around herself. He knew her words came from fear, but the wound they left still stung. Without answering, he unbuckled the straps of his armor. Piece by piece he removed it, first the shoulder guards, then the chest plate, until finally the whole set of battered steel rested on the ground at her feet. The sound of metal striking the earth echoed across the camp. "I won't trouble you anymore," he said simply. And with that, he turned and walked away. The soldiers watched, stunned. Some whispered. Others bowed their heads in shame. Liara's chest tightened. For the first time in years, she felt words fail her. She wanted to call out to stop him, but pride held her tongue. She stood frozen as Daniel's figure disappeared into the shadows of the violet night, leaving his armor behind. A silent farewell. The fire crackled louder now, as though mocking the silence between them. Liara clenched her fists, but deep inside a quiet ache had begun to grow. She told herself it was nothing, that she did not need him, that a princess general did not bend for anyone, least of all a human. Yet when she looked at the armor lying abandoned at her feet, she felt something she had not felt in years. Loss. The night passed slowly. Liara walked among her soldiers, offering strength, but her heart was elsewhere. She replayed his words in her mind. I fight because it's the right thing to do. Alone in her tent, she sat with her sword across her lap. The war map lay unrolled on the table before her, but her eyes were unfocused. She could not forget the look on Daniel's face when he placed his armor down. It was not anger. It was not hate. It was sorrow. She told herself she had only spoken the truth, that humans were reckless, that he was reckless. But another voice whispered that perhaps she had spoken out of fear. Fear of relying too much on someone who was not of her people. Fear of showing weakness. Outside, the soldiers murmured quietly. Many had seen Daniel as a symbol of hope. He was different, yet he fought harder than anyone else. His departure left a shadow on the camp, one that even Liara's presence could not erase. As the night deepened, the violet sky turned darker, the moons hidden behind drifting clouds. Somewhere beyond the hills, Daniel walked alone. His armor was gone, but his resolve remained. For him, the war was no longer about kingdoms or crowns. It was about the people, those who needed someone to stand for them when no one else would. And so, while Liara sat in her tent with an ache in her heart she could not name, Daniel stepped into the unknown, carrying only his will and the quiet burden of a man who had once believed he belonged. The next morning broke quietly over the alien plains. The twin moons were fading, giving way to a pale orange sun that rose slowly over the ridges. Mist curled along the ground, and the campfires of Liara's army burned low, casting only thin smoke into the air. Yet there was no warmth in the camp. The soldiers moved slower than usual. Their voices were hushed. Their eyes carried unease. The absence of Daniel weighed on them more heavily than the defeat of any battle could have. He had been a stranger to them. Yes, a human with scars and weary eyes, but in the darkest of fights, he had stood in front of them, shielding them when no one else could. He had carried their wounded, fixed their weapons, shared what little food he had. Now the spot where he used to sit by the fire was empty, and the silence was sharp. Liara walked through the rows of her soldiers, her golden cape brushing the ground. She held her head high, but inside her chest was heavy. Her people looked at her with respect, but also with questions in their eyes, questions she could not answer. She had always been strong, proud, unyielding. To them she was the daughter of kings, the princess general who would never falter. But now every glance she caught seemed to whisper the same thing. Why did the human leave? She told herself it didn't matter, that Daniel was reckless, that he had no place among them. Yet when she passed the spot where his battered armor still lay on the ground untouched, her step slowed. The armor seemed to accuse her, to ask why she had pushed away the one ally who had stood beside her without question. That night, as the soldiers ate in silence, Liara sat apart, staring into the fire. Her thoughts drifted back to his words. I fight because it's the right thing to do. They rang in her mind like a bell she could not silence. Why had those words unsettled her so deeply? Perhaps because she had not spoken such words in years. Her life had been war since she was a child. She fought not because it was right, but because it was expected, because her people demanded it, because her crown demanded it. But Daniel fought with a different fire, one she did not understand, and it scared her. Meanwhile, Daniel walked through the wilderness under the strange alien sky. The land stretched out wide, dotted with twisted trees and glowing flowers that pulsed faintly in the dusk. He carried only a pack and a simple spear he had taken from the battlefield. His armor was gone, left behind like the weight of a life he no longer wanted. He moved quietly, his steps steady, his eyes scanning the horizon. He had lived as a soldier for too long not to remain cautious, but for the first time in many months he felt free. At night he slept near rivers, listening to the strange sounds of alien birds. During the day he hunted small game, sharing what he caught with travelers and villagers he passed. The people looked at him with surprise at first, a lone human wandering without armor, but soon they welcomed him, for he worked with his hands and asked for nothing in return. He repaired broken tools, carried heavy loads, helped build fences. Children followed him curiously, laughing when he showed them tricks with the spear. To them he was not a warrior but a friend. Slowly word spread through the villages of the human who fights without armor, who protects without asking for reward. Daniel found peace in their company. For once he was not only a weapon, he was simply a man. Back at the capital, whispers grew louder. Scouts returned with grim news. The enemy warlord, a fierce rival who had long sought to crush Liara's kingdom, was gathering forces again. His armies burned villages at the borders, knowing the princess's army had grown uncertain. Liara called her commanders together. The war map lay spread before them, marked with flames where villages had fallen. "We will strike before his army grows stronger," one commander said. "We cannot," another argued. "The men's spirits are low. They whisper of the human's departure. Some even say we lost our luck when he left." Liara's jaw tightened. A kingdom does not depend on one man. Yet even as she spoke, the truth gnawed at her. The enemy's timing was not chance. They knew her army faltered. They knew her soldiers doubted. And Daniel's absence was like a wound she could not close. When the meeting ended, Liara remained alone, staring at the map. Her eyes kept drifting to the southern villages, the ones Daniel might have passed through. She imagined him there, helping strangers, his quiet strength shining brighter than her golden armor ever could. The thought unsettled her. Why should it matter where he was? Why should she care? Yet she could not deny it. His absence echoed louder than his presence ever had. That night, unable to rest, Liara stepped outside her tent. The sky above was clear, the stars scattered like silver dust. The cool wind brushed her face and she closed her eyes. For a moment she let the weight of her crown slip away and she whispered into the night, "Why did you leave me so easily?" But of course there was no answer. Days later, Liara's fears proved true. Scouts brought word of another village burned, its people fleeing with nothing but ashes behind them. Liara's fist clenched, her anger sharp. But the report carried something else as well, something that made her heart skip. There was one who stood against the raiders, the scout said. A human, alone, he fought without armor, only a broken spear. He saved the villagers, then vanished before we could reach him. Liara's breath caught. She said nothing, but inside her chest stirred with something fierce and painful. He was alive. He was still fighting, but not for her, not for her crown. For the people. That night, as she stared once more at the abandoned armor still lying outside her tent, Liara finally admitted to herself what she had denied all along. Her harsh words had not been strength. They had been fear. Fear of needing him. Fear of trusting someone who did not belong. Fear of showing her people that even a princess general could rely on another. But now she saw clearly. He had not walked away from the war. He had walked away from her. And if she wanted him back, if she wanted to mend the bridge she had broken, she would have to find him. Not as a commander summoning a soldier, but as a woman seeking someone she could no longer deny she needed. And so, when the dawn came, Liara mounted her steed and rode south, her golden cape flowing behind her. She left the armor untouched, but her heart carried a weight heavier than steel. For the first time in years, the proud princess general did not march to claim victory. She marched to seek forgiveness. The southern lands stretched wide under the pale orange sun. Rolling hills met valleys where rivers glittered like silver threads. Small villages dotted the plains, each a cluster of stone homes and fields struggling to recover from war. It was in these villages that Daniel found peace. He had left behind his armor, his sword, and the weight of Liara's words. Now he lived quietly, moving from one settlement to another, offering his strength to those who needed it most. One morning, he worked beside farmers repairing a broken irrigation channel. His hands, calloused from years of holding steel, now lifted stones and dug earth. Sweat ran down his brow, but there was a quiet satisfaction in the labor. "You don't have to help us, stranger," one farmer said, wiping his forehead. Daniel smiled faintly. "I know, but it's better than watching." The man nodded, grateful. Children ran nearby, their laughter ringing in the air. They had grown used to the human with the kind eyes and quiet voice. Some even followed him, asking for stories of battles. Daniel never told them of blood or death. Instead, he spoke of courage, of protecting those who could not protect themselves. To them, he became a hero, not a warrior wrapped in steel, but a man who cared. Yet even as Daniel found this fragile peace, the world beyond the villages grew darker. The enemy warlords' forces spread like fire, burning homes, taking supplies, breaking the will of those who resisted. Refugees arrived daily, carrying tales of destruction. Daniel listened, his jaw tightening. He wanted to stay away from war, to leave behind the endless cycle of fighting and loss. But when he saw the fear in the children's eyes, the sorrow of mothers clutching what little they had left, he knew he could not turn away. One night, raiders descended on a village where Daniel stayed. The air filled with smoke as huts burned, and terrified villagers ran for safety. Daniel grabbed the only weapon he had, a broken spear left behind by an old soldier. He fought not with fury but with calm determination. His movements were sharp, precise, born from years of survival. He struck with the spear's blunt end to disarm, using his fists and strength to drive the raiders back. His clothes tore, his skin bled, but he did not stop until the last of the raiders fled into the darkness. When it was over, the villagers gathered around him. Some wept in relief. Others touched his hands as though he were more than a man. "You saved us," an old woman whispered. Daniel shook his head. "No, I just did what anyone should do." But in their eyes, he was something more. The stories of the unarmored human spread quickly, traveling from village to village. Far away, Liara rode hard across the plains. Days had passed since she had left her army behind, and the weight of her choice pressed on her shoulders. She was a princess general, yet here she was, chasing after a man she had driven away with her pride. She remembered the look on Daniel's face when he set down his armor. There had been no hatred, only sorrow. That memory haunted her more than any scar of battle. At night, when she rested under the stars, she thought of his words. "I fight because it's the right thing to do." How could someone who had no crown, no duty, fight with more honor than those born to it? Her journey took her through villages scarred by war. In each she heard the same whispers. A human came. "He fought the raiders. He carries no armor, but he protects us. He saved my son." Liara's heart tightened with every story. She felt shame, but also a strange pride. He had walked away from her, yet he had not abandoned her people. Finally, she reached a village at the edge of the plains. Smoke still lingered in the air, the scent of a recent attack heavy on the wind. Villagers worked to rebuild, their faces weary but determined, and among them she saw him. Daniel stood at the center of the crowd, helping raise a fallen beam onto a roof. His clothes were torn, his arms bruised, but his posture was steady. Children clung to his legs, laughing even in the ruins. Liara's breath caught. For a moment she did not move. She had seen him fight on battlefields, but this was different. Here he was not a warrior, but something more, a protector, a symbol of hope. When Daniel finally noticed her, his expression did not change. He set down the beam, wiped the sweat from his brow, and walked toward her with quiet steps. "Princess," he said simply, his tone polite but distant. Liara's throat tightened. She had rehearsed words during her long journey, but now they slipped away. You are alive," Daniel nodded. "I am." There was a pause. The villagers watched, sensing the weight of the moment. Liara finally forced herself to speak. "I came to find you." Daniel raised an eyebrow. "Why?" She hesitated. Pride still fought against honesty, but she knew she could not repeat the mistake of her harsh words. "Because I was wrong." His gaze softened slightly, but he remained guarded. "You weren't wrong about me being reckless. Maybe I am. But you were wrong if you think I fight for glory or honor. I fight for people. For them." He gestured toward the villagers. Liara looked around at the faces, men, women, and children who stared at Daniel with gratitude. Her chest ached. She had led armies, but she had never earned this kind of love. "You left the war," she said quietly. Daniel shook his head. "No, I left you." The words struck her harder than any blade. She lowered her eyes, unable to answer. For years she had built her pride like armor, but now it cracked under the weight of truth. That night, Liara stayed in the village. She watched as Daniel sat with the children, carving small wooden figures for them. His rough hands moved gently, his eyes soft with patience. She thought of all the times he had shared food with her soldiers, mended their weapons, carried their wounded. She had seen it before, but she had never understood it. He was not reckless. He was selfless. Later, when the villagers slept, she approached him by the fire. He looked up, waiting for her to speak. "I don't know how to say this," she admitted, her voice low. "I have spent my whole life being strong, being proud. But I pushed you away because I was afraid." "Afraid of what?" Daniel asked softly. "Afraid of needing someone. Afraid of trusting someone not of my blood. Afraid that if I let you in, I would not be able to stand alone anymore." Daniel studied her quietly. The firelight flickered across his face. "And now?" Liara's golden eyes glistened. "Now I see that standing alone is not strength. It is emptiness." For the first time, her voice broke. She looked away, ashamed. Daniel was silent for a long moment. Then he spoke, his tone calm but firm. "I can't go back to what we were. Not after what you said. Not after what it cost me." Her heart sank. But then he added, "That doesn't mean I won't fight when I'm needed. Just don't ask me to fight for crowns and thrones. I'll fight for people, always." Liara nodded slowly. She understood. Perhaps it was more than she deserved, but it was also more than she had expected. As the night stretched on, Liara sat quietly by the fire, watching him. For the first time, the proud Princess General felt not like a leader or a warrior, but simply a woman sitting beside someone she had once taken for granted. And Daniel, though distant, allowed her to sit there in silence. The gulf between them was not yet bridged. But in that quiet night under the alien stars, a fragile thread of understanding began to form. Neither of them knew what trials awaited, but both felt it. The story between them was not finished. Not yet. The morning sun rose over the plains, spilling pale light across the villages Daniel had come to protect. Smoke still lingered from the last raid, curling like thin fingers into the sky. The villagers worked quietly, rebuilding homes and fields, but a sense of unease ran through them. Daniel moved among them, checking the repairs, helping where needed. His spear leaned against a wall, a reminder that though he sought peace, he remained a warrior at heart. He could not ignore the threat that loomed beyond the hills. Far away, Liara rode hard with a small group of her loyal soldiers. They had tracked the enemy warlord's army to the outskirts of the southern plains. Her golden cape flowed behind her, the weight of command pressing on her shoulders. Yet her thoughts were not on strategy alone. They were on Daniel. He had chosen to fight in his own way, and she had watched him save lives without armor, without orders, without concern for himself. Pride mixed with fear in her chest. She worried for him, but she also could not deny the admiration that burned quietly in her heart. The first signs of danger appeared at midday. Scouts returned, breathless. "The warlord's army is moving faster than expected," one said. "We must act before they strike the villages." Liara's jaw tightened. She had hoped to arrive in time to guide Daniel, to fight alongside him as they once had, but he had already engaged the enemy. The village nearest to the scouts' report was small, surrounded by low walls and fields of crops. Daniel was there, already in action. Raiders had descended from the hills, armed and merciless, but Daniel, standing with only his broken spear, faced them calmly. He did not shout, he did not rush recklessly. He simply moved with purpose. Each strike was precise, aimed to disarm, not kill. Each motion was measured, yet strong enough to defend those who had no weapon. The villagers watched in awe as he intercepted a raider attempting to climb the walls. He grabbed the man's wrist, twisted it, and sent him stumbling backward. A young boy clutched Daniel's leg, and he crouched down to steady him before facing another attacker. It was chaos, but Daniel's presence brought order. He became the center of the storm. Liara arrived just as the fight reached its peak. From the ridge above the village, she saw him. No armor, no army at his back, just a human standing firm against a group of seasoned raiders. Her soldiers gasped. They had trained for years, yet none of them had seen courage like this. The human they had whispered about, the one who had walked away from her army, was now their greatest ally without even trying to prove himself. Liara's chest tightened. Pride, shame, and admiration collided inside her. She shouted orders to her troops, but her eyes never left Daniel. He was moving like a force of nature, dodging, blocking, protecting the villagers. A raider lunged at a mother clutching her child. Daniel intercepted him with the spear, throwing the man aside. He caught the child, holding him close until the mother could run to safety. Another raider charged from behind. Daniel spun and knocked him off his feet with a well-timed strike of his fist. Each movement was precise, deliberate, and full of strength. Even without armor, he was unstoppable. Liara felt the weight of her earlier words, the harsh dismissal she had given him, pressing against her heart. She had thought she was teaching him a lesson. She had thought she was protecting herself from attachment. But now she saw what she had missed. He was more than reckless. He was a man of courage and honor that outshone her own. Her soldiers began to notice too. Whispers spread through the ranks. Look at him. A human. Without armor. He stands against them all. Why did she ever doubt him? Liara ignored the voices. Her focus was on Daniel. On the way he moved through the fray, his eyes calm, his body steady. She realized that he had become a symbol, not just to her soldiers, but to everyone who watched. He was proof that humanity's strength was not in weapons or armor, but in courage and heart. The battle reached a critical point when the raiders regrouped for a final charge. They were larger in number, more organized and fueled by the promise of conquest. Daniel's spear snapped during a parry, leaving him with nothing but his fists. The villagers scattered to the walls, hoping to survive. Daniel did not falter. He met the charge head-on, moving with speed and agility that seemed impossible for one man. He disarmed raiders, used their own momentum against them, and kept them away from the villagers. Liara realized she had underestimated him. She had believed armor, swords, and armies were the measure of strength. But Daniel had proven otherwise. Strength came from resolve, from courage, from the willingness to protect when no one else would. She led her soldiers down into the fray, but Daniel's presence remained the pivot of the battle. Together, human and alien fought as one, their movements synchronized without words. The villagers began to rally, encouraged by the human who refused to yield. By the time the sun began to set, the raiders had been driven back. The village was battered but intact. Daniel stood in the center, exhausted, bruised, and bloodied, yet unbowed. His chest rose and fell as he caught his breath. The villagers surrounded him, offering thanks and relief. Liara approached him slowly. The firelight from the rebuilding efforts illuminated her face, and for the first time her expression was unguarded. "You," she said, her voice low, almost trembling. "You've done what no armor, no army could do. You've saved them." Daniel wiped blood from his brow, ignoring her praise. "I did what anyone should do. No one deserves to die when they can be protected." Liara swallowed, fighting the pride that had driven her to push him away. "I see now. I misjudged you." He looked at her, his eyes calm, his jaw firm. "It's too late for that." Her chest tightened, but she did not retreat. She took a step closer. "No, it's never too late. Not for this. Not for what matters." Daniel studied her, reading her words, sensing her sincerity. He did not respond immediately. He had left once to preserve his dignity, but now he saw her not as a commander, not as a princess, but as someone willing to see the truth. The villagers whispered among themselves, seeing the tension between them. Even in the midst of recovery and rebuilding, something had shifted. Something unspoken had begun. That evening, as the fires burned low and the villagers worked quietly, Liara remained by Daniel's side. She helped tend to minor wounds, carried water, and moved supplies. She could see the way the villagers looked at him, not just as a protector, but as a man of honor. For hours they worked in silence. Words were unnecessary. The air between them carried understanding, and slowly a fragile bond began to form again. Liara realized something important. Daniel did not need her approval, her words, or her praise to act. He acted because he believed it was right, and she had finally learned that true strength was not in command or pride, but in courage and selflessness. For the first time she felt humility, and it was not weakness, it was clarity. Daniel, though silent, sensed the change in her. He still held his distance, but his eyes softened when she worked beside him. He had forgiven in his own way the harsh words that had driven him away. And perhaps in time, they could rebuild the trust that had been broken. The night stretched on and the village settled under the stars. Smoke rose from the fires, carrying with it the scent of healing and survival, and somewhere in the distance the enemy warlord's army lay in wait. Unaware that the human who had walked away would soon stand as the shield not only for villages, but for an entire people. Liara watched Daniel as he moved among the villagers. He was unarmored yet unshakable. He was human, yet more than she had ever expected. And she knew that when the next battle came, he would not falter. The days following the battle were tense but full of quiet rebuilding. Villages once scarred by raiders now had new fences, repaired roofs, and fields tended by hands that had begun to hope again. Daniel moved among them, his presence steady and calm, offering help without demand or expectation. Liara remained by his side. She did not demand obedience or loyalty as she had in the past. Instead, she offered her strength where it was needed, quietly following his lead. The villagers whispered about the princess general who had humbled herself beside the human warrior. Some shook their heads in disbelief, others smiled. Despite the calm, tension lingered in the air. The enemy warlord had not been defeated, only delayed. Scouts brought reports of his army gathering on distant plains preparing to strike again. Liara knew that when the next battle came, she could not rely solely on her soldiers. She needed Daniel, not as a subordinate but as a partner, a force equal to her own. Daniel sensed the change in her. He noticed the way she observed him, not with command or judgment but with understanding. He also noticed the subtle signs of pride softened by respect. Slowly, he began to allow himself to feel something he had tried to ignore: hope. One evening, after tending to a village's well, Daniel and Liara stood on a hill overlooking the plains. The sun was low, casting gold across the land. Villagers worked below, their laughter carrying faintly on the wind. Liara broke the silence. "You saved more than these people, Daniel. You saved their faith." Daniel looked at her. "It was never about me. It was always about them. That's what humans do. We protect when others cannot." Liara nodded, absorbing his words. "I see that now. And I see how foolish I was to judge you with harsh words before understanding your heart." He studied her quietly. "And now?" "Now," she hesitated, her voice soft. "I hope you can forgive me." Daniel's lips curved into a faint smile. He nodded once. "I never wanted to fight you, Princess. I just needed to step away to remember why I fight at all. And I did." For the first time in days, Liara felt the tension inside her release. The wall she had built around herself cracked gently, allowing warmth to seep in. She realized that this human, this man without armor, had shown her a truth she had forgotten. Courage was not measured by strength or status, but by the willingness to act for what is right. The peace was short-lived. Scouts returned at dawn with alarming news. The enemy warlord had launched a sudden attack on the northern villages. Fires burned across the horizon and smoke stretched high into the sky. Villagers screamed, running for safety. Liara mounted her steed, the familiar weight of command returning to her shoulders. But this time she did not act alone. She looked to Daniel, standing calmly beside her, spear in hand. His expression was focused, determined, and unflinching. "Are you ready?" she asked. He nodded. "I fight for them, and I fight beside you." Together they rode toward the chaos. Liara led the soldiers, but Daniel was the anchor for the villagers. Wherever he moved, the frightened found courage. Wherever he stood, the enemy hesitated. The battle was fierce. Raiders struck in waves, seeking to overwhelm the defenders. Liara's soldiers fought bravely, but it was Daniel who became the symbol of resistance. He intercepted every attack, protected every fleeing villager, and inspired both humans and aliens to stand firm. At the battle's climax, Daniel faced the enemy warlord himself. The massive figure towered over him, armor gleaming under the sun, sword raised high. Villagers and soldiers alike froze, expecting the human to be struck down. But Daniel did not flinch. He remembered the countless times he had chosen to act when others could not. He remembered the villages, the children, and the people who had come to rely on him. And most of all, he remembered Liara's eyes, full of respect, hope, and trust. The warlord swung his sword, a massive arc aimed to crush. Daniel dodged with skill, grabbing the man's wrist and using the momentum to throw him to the ground. The fight was brutal but brief. The warlord's confidence crumbled as Daniel's determination proved unstoppable. With one final strike, the human disarmed him and forced him to flee, leaving his army in disarray. The soldiers cheered. The villagers cried with relief. And Liara, standing atop her steed, felt a pride that went beyond words. As the sun set on the battlefield, the smoke clearing, Daniel finally allowed himself to rest. Villagers gathered around him, offering food and water. Liara dismounted and approached, her eyes warm but serious. "You have done more than anyone could have imagined," she said. "Not just with your strength, but with your heart. You've reminded us all what courage really is." Daniel shook his head. "I did what I had to do. That is all." Liara smiled gently this time. "No, Daniel. You did more than all of us. You walked away from pride, from fear, and you still chose to fight for what is right. That is why we needed you. That is why I—" She paused, searching for the words. "I needed you." Daniel's eyes softened. He had seen her humility, her willingness to learn, and her respect for what he stood for. For the first time, he felt that perhaps he could trust her completely, not as a commander, not as a princess, but as a person who had grown to understand him. In the days that followed, the villages rebuilt. Daniel continued to help wherever he could, but he was no longer alone. Liara stayed beside him, not commanding but supporting. Together, they became a symbol of hope. The soldiers who had once doubted Daniel now looked to him with respect. They had seen a human without armor stand against overwhelming odds, protect the innocent, and inspire courage. The story spread across the lands, reaching even the distant cities. Liara's people began to understand that strength was not only in their weapons or armor. Humanity's courage, their determination, and their will to protect those who could not protect themselves were unmatched. One evening, as the sun dipped below the horizon, painting the sky with shades of red and gold, Daniel and Liara stood together on a hill overlooking the villages. The fires of rebuilding glowed faintly, and laughter and chatter drifted up to them. "You've taught me something," Liara said softly. "That strength is not just about fighting. It's about standing when others fall, protecting when others flee, and never losing your heart." Daniel looked at her, a small smile forming. "And you've taught me that even a princess general can learn to see the heart, not just the armor." They laughed quietly, the tension of the past weeks dissolving. In that moment, the battles, the harsh words, and the doubts seemed distant. All that remained was understanding, trust, and a shared purpose. Liara reached out, resting her hand on his arm. "Stay," she said simply. "Not as a soldier, but as the human who saved more than we ever could." Daniel looked at her, then at the villages below, then back to her. Finally, he nodded. "I will stay, for them. And for you." The wind blew across the plains, carrying with it the scent of peace, hope, and a future built not on fear, but on courage and understanding. As night fell, the two of them stood together, watching the stars above. They had both walked away from pride, from harsh words, from fear. And in doing so, they had found something stronger than any armor, greater than any victory, a bond built on respect, courage, and the human heart. And in that bond, both the human and the princess general knew that no matter what battles lay ahead, they would face them together, because true strength did not come from armor, crowns, or swords. It came from the courage to protect, the willingness to stand, and the heart to forgive. The plains were quiet now, but the legacy of one human who had chosen to act for what was right would be remembered for generations.